June 19th, or Juneteenth, a blending of the words June and 19th, is a holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom. It's considered the longest running African-American holiday and has also been referred to as Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day, and the Juneteenth Independence Day. The holiday commemorates the anniversary of June 19, 1865, in Galveston, Texas, when Major General Gordon Granger issued General Order Number 3, which announced that in accordance with President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, all slaves are free. Although the Emancipation Proclamation had already outlawed slavery in the US almost 2.5 years earlier in 1863. Months after General Granger's announcement in Texas, the 13th, oops, sorry about that. Did I lose you?
There you are.
Okay, sorry about that. Months after General Granger's announcement in Texas, the 13th Amendment was ratified, abolishing slavery in the final 3 states that had not been subjected to President Lincoln's order. Going forward, Juneteenth became a holiday of celebration for former slaves who could celebrate their freedom. Celebrations include food, music, arts and culture, sporting events, spiritual ceremonies, recital of the Emancipation Proclamation, as well as education to remind us all of the challenges of racial injustice that were faced in the past and those that we still face today. In 1980, Juneteenth became a Texas state holiday. And this year's celebration, however, is a more historic one. Today is the first federal Juneteenth holiday in American history. After years of campaigning, the Senate has unanimously passed a resolution, and President Joe Biden signed into law the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act to establish Juneteenth as a national US holiday. It is the first new national holiday established since the Martin Luther King Day in 1983. When speaking about Juneteenth, President Biden said, "The emancipation of enslaved Black Americans didn't mark the end of America's work to deliver on the promise of equality. It only marked the beginning." We encourage you to learn more about this important holiday, speak to others about it, and participate in local celebrations where possible. Thank you, and happy Juneteenth.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was absolutely wonderful. So we're going to head into things today. So part of this DE&I forum is ensuring that everyone here has the opportunity to make new connections, and with those new connections, we'll be able to grow opportunity and improve inclusion. And so I wanted to give everyone the opportunity this morning to meet one another. So we'll be adjourning into some breakout rooms for about 6 minutes. And then following, we'll get into the expert panel. And following that, Tim Smith from the RICS will be giving a brief update on what has happened with the initiatives since we last spoke, and I'll outline a couple of those for those who are joining today. And then we will talk about future programming and ways to get involved. Wonderful. Okie dokie. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Bruce Kellogg now, who is hosting the panel discussion today. So Bruce, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone, whether you're a member of the RICS or a prospective member or someone who has a tremendous interest in this particular topic. We welcome everybody. This is our second quarterly DEI forum. And I think that this is an incredible topic. So, but I also want to thank my fellow work group members, and I see some of them are on the program today. That's great. And in particular, I would like to thank you, Georgia, for being a wonderful chair of this forum and the committee, the work group that we're involved with. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate everything you do. Disabilities is probably one of the most misunderstood topics to discuss as a form of diversity, and brings with it many challenges that are often not adequately addressed or perhaps appropriately addressed. To do this, though, we have an incredible panel of experts to provide their insight into this topic. During the program, you will receive very positive messages from our panelists and our moderator. Our moderator is Gayatri Kini, who will take charge and begin our discussion in just a moment. Gayatri is the CEO, the owner and founder of an organization called the Accidental Ally. She is from San Francisco Bay Area of California, and she will explain much more eloquently than I could the focus and intent of our program. She is a passionate and committed supporter of individuals with disabilities, which is why she is our incredible and capable moderator today. I, like some of you, have been impacted by disabilities. I learned a long time ago that it would not be in my or my family's best interest to remain silent about it. Instead, I jumped into the learning process with both feet, which brings me to where we are at this time. Thank you very, very much for all of you being here. I hope it will have a positive impact on each and every one of you. And I now turn it over to Gayatri.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a lovely introduction. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It is an absolute honor to be here with you today. As Bruce said, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm used to interacting with the technology community, having spent about 20 years of my professional life working for companies like Apple and Intuit. And so when Bruce reached out, my first reaction was, I know nothing about real estate. How can I help you? The more we talked, the more I realized that the work that we are doing on disability inclusion is not necessarily industry specific, right? It is something that applies across all industries because it's work that is very deeply connected with how humans see each other and interact with each other. I've been reflecting on my own journey on accessibility and disability inclusion. And the more I think about it, the more I have realized that it has really kind of helped me recognize the compassion and the love that I have for my own family members who have and still continue to live with different kinds of disabilities. You know, my grandmother had severe hearing loss. My father's brother has significant cognitive disabilities. I have several members in my family who have depression and anxiety. So you begin to realize that disability actually impacts everyone. And so this is a very important conversation for all of us to have. I want to start off by saying thank you to Bruce, to Georgia for taking the leadership on this, to RICS, to all of the attendees. You know, your presence here is your leadership, and your willingness to participate in the conversation is leadership. And of course, our wonderful panelists, you know, you're all my great friends, Sherry, Rogine, Peter, Emily. I've really enjoyed getting to know you guys in the last few months. So jumping right into it, I felt that a panel discussion, we're all among friends, and this is going to be hopefully a discussion that prompts you to think about your own perception about disabilities, to think about the people in your life with disabilities. And also, we want to leave you with a few calls to action that you can apply to your work with the RICS. So let's start with an introduction. I want to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, but with a slight twist. Please introduce yourself with a word that best describes you and your name, and tell us a little bit about yourself. So I'll kick it over to Sherry first.
Thanks, Gayatri. So my name is Sherry Byrne-Haber. I also live in the San Francisco Bay Area, except that not in the valley, but at the top of Table Mountain. My one word is probably stubborn. That's the word that I hear that used to describe me most frequently. I'm the mother of 3 and the grandmother of 1. And I've been using a wheelchair due to a congenital bone issue off and on almost my entire life. But really, I got into accessibility because of my daughter, and my middle daughter is deaf. And, you know, I, at this point, just use my think of my wheelchair as a way of getting around. But, you know, being deaf cuts you off from people as opposed to being cut off from things, which I think is a little bit less terrible.
Thank you, Sherry. We appreciate you being stubborn. Peter.
Hi, thank you. I'm here in New York City, so hello, West Coast and everywhere else. I'm pushy, and I'm pushy about communicating. And what I like to communicate about is what I do professionally. I work with organizations to help them understand social accessibility. We are learning about physical accessibility, and we're learning about digital accessibility. Social accessibility is how people interact with each other. I'm blind, so I've had lots of experience with people who are just totally confused about what to do with that. And that happens to people who are deaf and hard of hearing and people in wheelchair users. So I've made a business out of training organizations how to understand disabilities. But for much of my career, I was a journalist writing about commercial real estate. And I used to host moderate a lot of Rick's panels here in New York. So nice to be here.
Thank you,
Great to be
Pushy
here.
Peter.
Thank you, Georgia. And Bruce.
Thank you, Pushy Peter. Let's go over to Rogine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Regine. I'm from South Florida. The one word that I can describe myself, that I'm determined. I would never give up. I believe in trying and trying and trying again until I get it done or succeed. I volunteer at Accidental Ally with Gaadri. I do their social media. I also volunteer at Ogborrow, which I do. I design their social media like Father Day, Mother Day, anything for them. So yeah, that's who I am. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rogine. Let's go over to Emily.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. I'm following along with my fellow panelists, Pushy Peter and Stubborn Sherry, to say I am enthusiastic Emily. I think alliteration is the way to go here. So, but I would say it's true. I am one of the fortunate ones to find a job right out of college with a psychology degree, and absolutely fell in love with it. This was almost 18 years ago. So, you know, I really feel like the work that I've been able to do in that time is a testament to the, you know, the expression, the quote, find a job you love and you never work a day in your life. Truly every day, every single day I feel that way. So, so that's my word.
Thank you, enthusiastic Emily, and thank you, Rogine. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Sherry. I want to take a quick minute to introduce Beth Wagmeister. She is the woman on the screen who is our ASL interpreter. So this is an inclusive event. You know, we couldn't figure out the closed captioning, but we'll find another way to get that in there before the recording is available. Thank you, Beth. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump right into it, shall we? I actually was, I had one more thing before we go in, and I think Emily just shared hers. To all the panelists, I'd like to ask you, what is the one quote that resonates the most with you, and why is it your favorite? Sherry, let's have you go first.
So I was an advocate for the deaf for 8 years. And I did a lot of health insurance appeals. And so largely focusing on children who had been turned down for speech therapy, hearing aids, cochlear implants, occasionally for adults who'd been turned down for interpreters. And I always started every written insurance appeal with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, who, and I'm just going to paraphrase this here because I don't have it memorized, but it said, of all the injustices in the world, discrimination in healthcare was the worst.
Thanks for sharing that, Sherry. Peter?
Sure. Thanks. I have two actually, but I just figured out how they're related. The first I shared with you, Gayatri, which is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I have no idea who said that first, but I live by it. And the second is from the writer Donald E. Westlake, and I read it as a child and as a teenager in a detective novel, and it was, why put off till tomorrow what you can avoid doing altogether? And I realized today that's what I like about that. That really means don't waste time. Do what you really want to do, what you really need to do. And that's why the first quote is also apt, because it means don't get hung up in stuff that's just not really going to get you where you want to go. That's
So, of course, I had to Google it, Peter, and it's originally attributed to Voltaire.
okay.
So
The first quote, not the second, I assume.
No, the first one. So that one goes back a ways.
Great.
Thank you, Peter. Rojeen?
So one of my favorite quotes is by Chelsea Clinton, and it said, "Determination takes you a long way. Keep on pushing yourself, and you will get there." But that's my quote.
That's a good one, Rojeen. Thank you.
Pushiness.
Emily, yeah, it's a theme. Pushiness is a theme today. I love it. Emily, why don't you share yours?
Sure. Actually, my quote that I came prepared with was, this is a quote by Jackie Robinson, and it's, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." And I selected that because he's a personal hero, but also kind of a childhood hero, really, for me, but also a trailblazer in terms of inclusion, not only in baseball and sports, but in society in general. So I felt that was that really does resonate with me.
Thank you, Emily. The one quote that I often refer back to quite often is by Stella Young, who was a disability activist. She said, "Disability doesn't make you exceptional, but questioning what you think you know about it does." And to me, that's really meaningful and has shaped a lot of the work that I've done on disability inclusion. So when Bruce and Georgia talked to me about the title of this panel, "Embrace Disability as a Form of Diversity to Attract Talent and Improve Business," my initial reaction was, that's 4 panel discussions. There's a lot to unpack there. But they were very, very clear that they wanted that to be the title, and that's the topic today. So what I did is we broke it up into 3 different sections. So we'll first go into talking about what does embracing disability as a form of diversity mean? And then we'll go into some other related topics. So my first question to all the panelists is, what has been your own journey of embracing your disability? Peter.
Oh gosh, well, we don't have time for that because it's been a long one, but it's basically I have a progressive vision loss condition, or 2 of them actually. And it's just taken time from when I was someone who thought he could see everything to now being someone who really can't see hardly. I can see light and shadow. So it took a long time to accept that I was blind, because I was constantly going blind. But it's over time, it's been a great journey. And I think accepting was possibly the best thing I've ever done for myself. So yeah,
Okay.
that's
Thank
just
you,
to keep it short.
Roji?
So for me, my journey in embracing my disability was unique. Growing up, I wasn't raised as disabled, so I didn't see myself as disabled. I was included in most of the school activities. My parents and my teachers treat me the same as the other kids. But that changed as I got older. I started to feel that I did not fit in. I felt like a third wheel. I was in the group, but was not seen. So I decided to find myself and embrace who I am. I did not want my disability to define me. So I find groups that I have things in common, ensemble, different designers, entrepreneurs. I went on different platforms where I was inspired by others. I have interacted with different people on those platforms. In one of those meetups, I really feel that I was disabled. So when someone from the group reached out to me and has been a great support and mentor since. Thanks, Marcelo. I am currently doing 2 internships. I have grown a lot over the past few years to embrace my disability, and today, here I am.
Yeah, Regine. Woo! Nice work. Thank you so much. Emily?
Yes, I work for a supported employment company that provides assistance to individuals in building careers. And I feel like I have had the opportunity to embrace disability since I was born. My uncle sustained a traumatic brain injury prior to my birth. And so I spent a lot of my childhood sitting on his lap. He was a wheelchair user my entire childhood. And so that was just a very natural relationship for me, just from childhood. Going through school, I was actually in the school system that was the first nationwide to have full inclusion in the classrooms through primary school and elementary school. This was Montgomery County, Virginia. So I was in a classroom with students that were receiving special education, mainstreamed. And so, I just never really saw a gap in any way in terms of a disability or a diagnosis. And then, I through college interned at a school for boys with learning disabilities and emotional disturbances. I've just sort of gravitated in that direction, and then became very fortunate to find my current job out of school.
Thanks for sharing, Emily. Sherry?
Yeah, so I was in one of the first inclusion mainstream programs. If I had been born a year earlier, I would have ended up in a 100% special education program just for students with disabilities. And so I have always, just been very upfront and very open to talking about my congenital disabilities. What I discovered is what a lot of people with congenital disabilities discover is once that you have one disability, you tend to collect them. And so I have a number of acquired disabilities as well. I developed type 1 diabetes, and I also have glaucoma. And so there's a very different psychological component between congenital disabilities and acquired disabilities. With congenital disabilities, it's just something that you never had the ability to do. So, people say really silly things to me like, well, don't you miss being able to run marathons, or don't you miss being able to ski? And I'd be like, why? I've never been able to do it. You can't miss something that you've never been able to do. Psychologically, glaucoma I was able to see relatively normally, and now I can't. And so it's something that I had that I lost, and it's a very different adaptation process. But I find that, if I consider myself fairly lucky, all things being equal. I was born in Canada. My family moved to the US. I've always had access to the best of healthcare. I grew up in Silicon Valley with an aptitude for computers, so that turned out to be pretty lucky. And so what I like to do is I like to try to make sure that other people have the same access to everything that I had. And without accessible workplace tools, we know what the unemployment rate for people with disabilities looks like. It's terrible. And I'm currently the head of accessibility for VMware, which is, I like to call it, the largest software company you've never heard of. We're a division of Dell. And 85% of the tools when I started were not accessible. And so getting through all of that backlog and saying, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. So draw the line in the sand that you don't cross. And B, how are we going to go backwards and fix all the stuff that we did wrong so that we open up more equal opportunities to employees with disabilities?
Sherry, thank you for that. And let's use that as a segue into my next question, which is, what are some of the toughest barriers that disabled people face today that hold them back from fully participating in the workforce?
So is that me or somebody else?
That's you, Sherry.
Oh, okay. Design tools, 0 of them are accessible. Survey tools, if you're going to survey a customer on their experience, 4 or 5 of them are accessible, the vast majority are not. So, people think, well, they don't think about accessibility. And I'm like, well, how do you like the headline, fill in the blank company not interested in opinions from blind customers? Because that's effectively what you're doing when you're surveying using an inaccessible tool. I actually got a survey a couple of weeks ago from a tech company that was surveying about keyboard only usage. And typically you only, you don't use a mouse only if you're disabled. Most non-disabled people use mice. And the survey was not keyboard accessible. And I'm like, what? This makes no sense whatsoever.
I think I got that one too.
Okay. On the tech side of the world, the number one barrier is Jira. Okay, Jira is a tool that everybody in tech uses. It's a bug tracking system, and it is inaccessible. So if you want to work in tech and you want to work in an area where you either need to read bug tickets so you can fix them, or you need to log bug tickets for other people to fix, you need to get help with that. Nobody should be in a job where they're continually having to ask for help. Accommodations are one thing, but being forced to ask for help is a microaggression.
Sherry, I'm going to press you a little bit more on this. If we set aside the obvious issues that exist today with tools, what would you say about culture in the workplace, and how much of a factor that is in people with disabilities actually, having the fair opportunities?
So you get into this catch-22 situation where you don't have employees with disabilities, and this is true for pretty much any underrepresented minority. People hire people that they're comfortable with, and that tends to be people who look and behave like the people who are the hiring managers. So you start with a pool of fairly homogenous people, then you don't get the executive support unless the executives are enlightened for some reason because they have a disabled child or a disabled sibling. Occasionally that happens. More often than not, it doesn't. And when it's not important to the executive, it's not important to the people. And so then you get into this negative feedback loop where nothing changes because you haven't built the culture to allow it to change. And the people who start off first, I was the first female wheelchair user in a company that had 21,000 employees at the time that I started at VMware. you have to have some pretty thick skin because you're going to be in a situation where you have to highlight everything that's wrong and you have to drive the fixes to those things so that you can then open up the opportunities for other people like you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sherry. Emily, you do a lot of work with employers on disability employment. What are some things that employers can do to address these barriers?
Well, I'm nodding like crazy as Sherry talks because I've been in those conversations on behalf of people. A lot of times when we present the right match to the right job, the employer sees it as it's too much work on the front end, or it would be too much to try to figure out. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be business as usual. And I would tell employers that from the very beginning. This isn't going to look the way that it always does. And that doesn't mean that it's hard. It just means that it might be different. We might need to look at operations in a slightly different way. We might just be talking about the smallest accommodation that could make such a world of difference for the employee. I would encourage employers to look at their business structure differently than before, and just to be open to ways that this might actually impact their bottom line. When you hire someone from this particular segment of the workforce, you will tend to find longevity, consistency, quality of work, really dedication to the employer, especially an employer who's been open to accommodations and supportive from the very beginning. That as a business person, you're securing a stable employee there. This is a way to reduce turnover. This is a way to ensure that your work is done in a quality way, with passion, with dedication, and it happens to be the right thing to do. So that would be my encouragement is just to already know from the get-go it's going to be different, and also be open to the fact that different is good.
Thank you, Emily. I just want to share with the audience that at the Accidental Ally, we launched an internship program a few weeks ago with 5 young people between the ages of 16 and 20. 4 of them are young people with Down syndrome, and 1 of them is autistic. And it has been one of the most incredible experiences for them as well as for us, because we've really kind of shattered on a daily basis a lot of the perceptions that exist about people with disabilities. And they continue to surprise me and impress me with their work ethic and what they bring to the table. So I highly encourage everyone to explore that for your organizations. Peter, question for you related to this is, how can people with disabilities overcome these barriers?
Oh, wow. Well, first, I was going to say, to answer your previous question, and it feeds right into this, someone with a disability who has gotten to the point where they are seeking work, and has already overcome an enormous challenge in getting an education, finding transportation, learning skills, all of the above. So what remains is really the other half, which is the organization that you're trying to fit into, to become part of, to contribute to. And unfortunately, I've never really been able to keep a job. So, and I think, that's in part because on my part, it would be because I may have failed to adequately advocate for myself in requiring accommodation. On the other side, it's what I referred to before as social accessibility, and what Sherry very rightly described as, it's the vicious circle. It's people who really don't know disability, don't know think of it through a very narrow lens, look at it through a very narrow lens. And if I have a mission in what I do, it's to try and change that perspective to one where disability is just a different way of being, but it has, of course, your life has equivalent value, but it's so often not seen that way. So you do what you can to educate hiring people and managers and whomever, and even setting an example, that can be great, but it's not always, if someone isn't paying attention, it's not going to happen. But persistence and pushiness, yes, always important. So
Thank you, Peter. Before I ask Rojin my next question, I'd like to engage the audience and ask you, we've been through this discussion a few minutes in now, and I'd like to ask you to engage in the chat room and tell us what is the one word that describes how you're feeling right now. Rojin, my question to you, how can we help young people with disabilities in schools and colleges prepare themselves to connect with enriching and fulfilling employment? I think that your story has a lot of things that we can learn from. So go ahead.
So, number one, I highly recommend that you request for accommodation when needed. Number two, choose a career that they will really enjoy so it doesn't feel like a job. And number three, get positive mentors who can guide them. Number four, apply for internship to make sure they are in the right field and to build up their resume. And number five, I would recommend to try vocational rehab. You can sign up with one in your area. They can be your advocate in the workplace.
Thank you,
So
Rojin.
just-
All great things to think about. I'm going to look at the.
I was going to say, just to follow up on what Rojin said, a lot of times people with disabilities have to assume that they need to fail before they ask for help. And that creates its own set of problems. When you have a disability and you know, I need fill in the blank in order to be successful, you need to ask for that up front. Don't wait until, it's already become a problem.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Sherry.
excuse me, I'd just like to jump in and say, my path has been, yes, I've never worked well within a corporate culture. So I've had to find my own way, build my own businesses of varying success. But I find that suits me. It makes me happy. If it fails, I don't have anyone to blame but myself. If it succeeds, it's similar. So
yeah. Thanks for sharing. Thank you. Some of the words I'm seeing here are inspired, undaunted, humbled, stubborn, grateful, relatable, honored, humbled. So thank you, audience. Thank you for sharing with us how you're feeling about this discussion. So we're going to switch gears into talking about what embracing disability to attract talent looks like. My question is to Sherry. What are some ways that employers can attract disabled talent?
Well, I always tell people that the number one indicator of whether or not a company does well with disabilities, how mature the organization is whether or not they have a disability employee resource group. The big thing is that you need people talking about disability when the disabled people aren't in the room, when the accessibility team is not in the room. And you do that by having a good representation of disabled employees. And you can do that through having a neurodiversity hiring initiative, for example, or having somebody review onboarding processes and say, well, could I onboard somebody who is blind during the pandemic? Could I onboard somebody who was deaf during the pandemic? What would I have to change to make that work? So you need some flexibility in being able, and some empowerment to be able to update those processes to make those hirings more likely to happen.
Thank you, Sherry. Emily, how can people with disabilities prepare themselves to reach for their dream jobs?
Yes, and I did want to say, Regine, this will seem as if I took notes off of your most recent answer, but we said so many of the same things. You are so right in terms of how people can prepare themselves, young people preparing for the workforce. The first thing is pay attention to your really strong interests and your skills. You know, so many of us throughout life, we do that. We look at what we're really good at. That might not be what you plan to make money doing, but you're kind and compassionate. You are detail oriented. You are punctual, good at time management. You're self-motivated. You know, what are some of your qualities that you hear other people say this about you, you know it about yourself, and what sorts of, what industries would find those traits to be marketable. You know, really think about what you have to offer, and don't be afraid to say what your dream job is. Everyone has a right to say what their dream job would be. All of us at one point had our childhood dream of what we imagined we would be able to get paid to do. And many of us shot and arrived as close to that as possible. Some of us may be another world away from that, but that's a career. But don't be afraid to say you want to be blank. Don't let a diagnosis, do not let a disability keep you from verbalizing what it is that you would like to do if you could wave the magic wand and make that happen. When you put it out there, you start putting a plan in place. You start getting your team on board. You start really setting a path, and you follow a trajectory that's in line with what everyone does in terms of a career. I would really encourage people to seek support from within your own network. This can be friends, family. It could be an agency such as Briggs & Associates, where I work. Seek guidance and mentorship from people in your field. If you really want to work in tech, connect with someone in tech. You know, if you'd like to work in real estate, contact some people. You might even have personal connections so that you could just pick the brains of someone in that industry. And then again, Regine, fantastic suggestion to seek the assistance of vocational rehabilitation. There's an agency in every state. And when you go to vocational rehabilitation and request the assistance of supported employment providers, you would receive the same support that my agency provides here in Georgia. So I did totally piggyback your answer.
Well, like minds, brilliant minds think alike, I guess that's what we say. I will add something though to both what you, Emily and Regine are saying, which is oftentimes the discussion is so focused on, and I think we do this to ourselves as well, is that we focus too much on what we cannot do versus what we can do. And building on that, I think, is so important. It's not just applicable to people with disabilities. I think it applies to all of us. Regine, I would love to pull you into, oh, sorry, actually, my next question is for Peter. Peter, what are the 3 biggest challenges we face in disability employment today, and how can we collectively address these challenges? I'm going to limit you to 3, the most important ones.
3, well, there's the first is really communication and understanding. It's if there's no communication, and here we have, I think it's Beth who's signing for us. We all saw the challenges you had at the outset today of communicating. If we can't communicate, we can't interact, and we can't move forward. The second, and it goes right into understanding and points of view about disability. Just two very quick stories. I recently stayed at a hotel, and when I got to my room, I found on the desk a welcome note in Braille. Now, I've been traveling for decades.
Wow.
No one has ever done that. It was
incredible.
It just blew my mind. And on the other hand, I recently was asked to unveil a plaque in honor of a friend who passed away at a famous organization for the blind here in New York. And I went and I did the unveiling. Everyone clapped when I unveiled, and I reached back up so I could read the plaque. There was no Braille on the plaque in my own house, so to speak. So it's consciousness, it's mindfulness, whatever label you want to put on it. That's a major blockage. And of course, it's what Sherry talked about, which is digital accessibility. And it's not just for blind people, it's people with all print disabilities, whether it's a motor dysfunction, motor impairment, or a learning disability, whatever. It's a wonderful tool. So, and it's so important and so neglected.
Thank you, Peter. Rogine, what has your experience taught you about stepping outside your comfort zone and reaching for opportunities?
Well, my experience taught me to speak up. Don't be scared. Be yourself. Really important. And reach out to sources that can help.
So Rogine and I work together at the Accidental Ally. She has been leading our social media effort. And when I first started talking to her, I realized that one of her favorite words is yes. She's always saying yes to things. And one of the things that I told her was that there's very little I know about social media, and I gave her very specific goals that we were targeting. And her answer was yes. And so I feel that a lot of the times it's taking that first step and saying, yes, I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to go find out is what makes all the difference. My next question is for all the panelists. I'll have you go for Sherry. How do we collectively address the skills gap and the pay gap that exists today in disability employment?
Well, I know one of the things that has personally benefited me as a woman is the laws that they passed in California, where they're no longer allowed to ask about my previous salary when I'm interviewing for a new job. Mm-hmm. And the job immediately after that law took effect, I received a 20% pay hike. Because the accumulation of the discrimination that had occurred in the past had, basically put me behind my peers in terms of that. So I think every state needs to pass one of those laws, or perhaps it even needs to be viewed as a federal law, since if you leave it to the states, there's certain states that shall not be named who just won't do it because that's not the way they do things. Skills gap and being from Canada, Canada has more generous subsidies from the federal government when people hire people with disabilities as interns. I've also seen it done the other way, which is China, for example. In China, if you have a company in Beijing, 1.7% of your employees must be disabled. And if they are not, you get fined $27,000 US for every FTE below the number. So if you're supposed to have, for example, 15 and you have 12, you get fined $81,000. And then the Chinese government takes that money and they put it back into education and retraining programs for people with disabilities to make it easier for them to get jobs. So that's like 3 different things that we could do that kind of cover the entire spectrum of how we could get the situation where we have a better better opportunities for people with disabilities. The US government goal for a company over 50 employees is 7%. That 7% of your employees should be willing to self-identify as having a disability on that yes/no paperwork where it's totally anonymous and you don't even have to indicate what your disability is. We have exactly 1 company in the entire country meeting that goal on a regular basis, which is Northrop Grumman. Even companies that are very well known for their disability inclusive policies, like Google and Apple and Microsoft, are still only at about 6%. At VMware, our numbers doubled in 2 years after we started that employee resource group. And that's one of the reasons why I point out, it's not just you've got people with disabilities, they're just not willing to disclose it. So part of it is you have to hire more people with disabilities, and part of it is you have to build an environment that's comfortable for the people with hidden disabilities, especially, to disclose them, because most of us are probably aware 70% of disabilities are hidden. Dyslexia, color blindness, hearing loss, mental health related issues, even diabetes. Or long haul COVID, I think is going to really shake up the way we think about disability, because we're going to have so many new disabled people trying to maintain their spaces in the workplace with accommodation.
Yeah, all great points, Sherry. Peter?
Well, I'll just first to sum up 3 words that sum up what Sherry said is regulation, education, and motivation. And we don't punish or penalize companies that don't meet that goal. We just say, oh, that's too bad. I have to confess, I can't remember the nub of the question. Can you just quickly repeat?
How can we address the skills gap and the pay gap that exists in disability employment? Yeah.
Well, I think that that really does cover it. Education, and I mean education, I don't mean vocational education, that's of course key, but it's education at base. So many children with disabilities are left behind in school for a whole slew of reasons. And then of course, when they reach workforce age, they have all of those gaps: skills gap, knowledge gap, pay, and when they get a job, there's pay gap. This country has only recently been doing away with 14C working regulations, which has allowed companies to pay people with disabilities sub-minimum wage, not even survival wage, wages on an hourly basis, or as a work by the piece. And their justification has always been, oh, well, they're just happy to have a job and have somewhere to go. Well, of course they are, but you're also happy to get work for free, or get what's essentially, indentured servitude. And so now that gap is closing, but it's only closing at the bottom level. And again, it's the ERGs that create networks of mentors and mentees, and mentoring is hugely important to close the gap.
Thank you, Peter. Georgia, we have 10 more minutes. Is that right? Okay, let's move along. Emily and Rogine, do you have anything to add to that question? If not, I can move to the next section.
I don't think it's fine to move on.
Okay, Rogine?
It's fine.
Thank you. The last section is on embracing disability to improve business. And I don't know if you've heard the statistic, but disabled people and their families represent about $8 trillion in annual disposable income, which is most often not something that businesses are aware of and exploring. So Sherry, my question to you is, why is it that most businesses fail to see the business opportunity of serving people with disabilities? And I'll ask you to keep it short because we have to move through the questions. Thank you.
Sure. So that's on us, the people with disabilities. There's a good study out of England that says 91% of people with disabilities have just gone to a competitor without ever complaining about the inaccessible practices in the first place. We need to make sure that we make our situation known to the store managers or to the executives of a company if it's a large chain, and to make sure that they know the loss of the business and the extent to which you are publicizing your dissatisfaction with their disability inclusion.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Peter, what is the long-term impact of continuing to ignore disability inclusion in our communities?
A lot of loss of economic growth, not just for companies that ignore it, but for for the larger financial markets. If you have buildings that don't allow people to get inside, that don't provide access, I was on a conversation earlier today actually in the breakout room, we were talking about inaccessible housing and just the absolute dearth of accessible housing in this country.
Yeah.
And so it's just that it's, Yep.
Thank you, Peter.
you're welcome.
Emily, you mentioned earlier that people with disabilities are some of the most loyal employees a business can hire. What are some success stories that you can share from your work on disability employment?
I'm sure. And for the sake of time, I think what I'll share is what would probably be most relevant to the members of this organization, which is the story of Aaron, who works for a financial advisor as a data mining specialist. Aaron is someone who is on the autism spectrum and has always expressed that he sees patterns that no one else can see. He knows details that people have overlooked. And so Aaron actually works side by side with the financial advisor to do data mining online to find people who could be a particularly welcoming target audience for their financial consulting business. And he finds similarities, he finds common interests between prospective customers and the financial advisors, and he sets up meetings. And once they have the meeting and they make the sale, he's credited with that, and he just brings in tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's all the time he's credited with that. So money that they never would have made.
That's an incredible success story. Thank you for sharing, Emily. Rojeen, as a self-proclaimed fashionista, what are some things you wish retailers knew about you that would help them earn your business and your loyalty?
Well, I would like them to know that they should not take my business for granted. I love to shop for trendy clothes, but it's upsetting to me when I do not see people like myself modeling their products or not included in marketing the product. If I can buy their product, why should I not be represented?
Perhaps the RICS marketing team can take advantage of your availability as a model in their marketing campaigns. I think that we would all love to see you on their posters. So this was a fantastic discussion, and thank you. I want to say thank you to the audience, because you guys have been incredibly engaging in the chat. If people are following the comments, it's been really wonderful to see what you're saying. It looks like a lot of what we're saying today is resonating with you. I have a bias towards action. And so my last question to all the panelists is, if there was one call to action that you would like to give the audience today, what would it be? Let's start with you, Rojeen.
Can you repeat the question, please?
The question is, if there was one call to action you would like to give the audience, what would it be?
Stand up for us. Talk up for us. Be an ally.
Right on. Thank you, Rojeen. Emily, what about you?
Yes, I would encourage everyone in this conversation to look within your network, whether that be personal network, professional network. Look for decision makers within their business. Look within your business, and encourage people to embrace DEI initiatives and an untapped candidate base in order to meet business need in every industry, really.
Peter, thank you, Emily.
Thank you. You know, I like to call disability the poor stepchild of the DEI movement or paradigm. And I also like to say that age is actually the poor stepchild of that. So what I want people to do is to start thinking about the relationship between disability and other marginalized communities, and your own, examine your own thoughts, impulses, and beliefs about disability, and how you'd like to change those, and be really honest with yourself. And
Sherry?
I would start by taking an inventory of all of your employee touch bases. What tools do they touch? What processes do they touch? What is it that they need to get done? And then proactively look and say, well, if that employee had autism, or if that employee couldn't use their legs, how would we need to change things to make it work for them? If you fix the processes first, it's much easier to bring the employees with disabilities in. Otherwise, you're looking at it in a very reactive situation rather than a proactive situation.
Thank you, Sherry. Remember when I asked you, audience, to put one word in the chat on how you feel? I would like you to do that again at the end of this conversation. Maya Angelou said that, people will not remember what you said or what you did, but people will remember how you made them feel. And I hope that this panel discussion has hit home when it comes to feelings. And hopefully this is a feeling of wanting to get involved, a feeling of wanting to ask the questions, a feeling of willingness to participate in the conversation, most importantly, to listen, and of course, to take action. So with that, I'm gonna say thank you again to Bruce for reaching out, and to Georgia for getting all of this together. The panelists, again, Sherry, Rogine, Emily, Peter, thank you for your incredible wisdom and for the work you're doing on a daily basis. And thank you, audience, for being here. It has been, for me, an honor to be a part of this panel discussion and to moderate it. So with that, over to you, Georgia. I hope we can do more of this.
I really look forward to that, Gayatri. That was an absolutely sensational panel. You're all such experts in your space, and yeah, I'm blown away by what I've learned today. And I put empowered in there. I think I've realized through that a lot of us have the ability to change the environments that we work in a lot more than we probably like to think. And so there's some great actions that I've taken away there. And yeah, I do look forward to doing some more. I think we'd like to sort of write an article. I know that the RICS communications team are on the phone here, so they are also have learned a hell of a lot from what you've shared in this region. So we'll definitely be doing more together. Bruce, did you want to say thank you?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Thank you to the panel and to the attendees. And I hope everybody got a lot out of it who did attend. And it's just been very, very emotional and wonderful input from everybody. Thank you so much.
Bruce, you're wonderful. Awesome. So what we're going to do to wrap up, we do have Tim Smith on the line. So Tim Smith is the head of thought leadership for the RICS and a close colleague of Barry Cullen, who leads diversity, equity and inclusion for the RICS. And he's joined us very late in the day in the UK, and he's got an update ready to share with us on some of the RICS initiatives, particularly around disability, and then also an update on the reverse mentoring program that they have been working on. So everyone is welcome to join this part of the meeting too. And so I'll hand it over to Tim, and thank you so much to all of our panelists.
Thank you, Georgia. And I just extend that thank you again. I mean, that was amazing. Thank you so much. It means so much to RICS that you taken your time to actually facilitate and lead such an important conversation. And I'd like to share something, seen as we do it. So my favorite quote is, I love Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes and Wake Up Everybody, which is probably one of the best songs. And it's like, the world won't change if we just let it be. And that's, and then the second thing is I have two stories about disability. So I, 3 years ago, was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I also have major depressive disorder. So great combo there. And my brother works for an organization called L'Arche, which is a worldwide organization. It's based in, but he's the executive director for DC. And I've been there many times, and it's a charity it works to support people with learning disabilities and actually places them into work. And for me, it's really humbling when I visit there, because we're just people. And that's what we need to actually get people to see, that we're just people that need dignity, respect, an opportunity, regardless of who you are. So I just thought I'd share that, just because a bit of continuity there, instead of just going straight into a PowerPoint slide. But it's this stuff that Emily, you said some great points, and so did the panel, just about, and Sherry, and about for us, we're just embarking on developing a global diversity inclusion strategy, which is really exciting to be. Barry and I and colleagues are working on it, and it's about that. It's not just a moral imperative. There's actually the business imperative, and that's something that we're looking to really get the message across to our firms across the globe. But just for this conversation, we're going to update you on where we are at the moment. So 4 pillars of work that we're doing at the moment, which is special. I hope this works, because special consideration, accessibility of information, visibility, and a initiative that we started at the beginning of this year called Our Mental Health. I think this is stuck, Georgia.
Do you want to stop and reshare?
No, there we go.
There we go. Got it.
It's a bit of a lag. Special considerations is about how we actually support our professionals, those coming through, our candidates during the process. Like, there's a diverse myriad spectrum of support and difficulties that they have, and as we've said there, it can include, but not limited to, physical or mental disabilities, but also looking at other protected characteristics, and also looking at neurodiversity, which is something that we've not really explored in any great depth, but I think it's something that we really do need to look at. This is, and we will share this slide deck after, this is a point plan of how we will actually support our professionals and candidates through the process, and actually working with our assessors to actually train them, upskill them, so they actually, and as it says there, understand the complexities.
Well, I think we've lost you there, Tim. Hopefully it reconnects.
I know you used to give me a summary email of what you're talking about so that I can visualize it. You know?
So I'll pick up with a couple of key points. If Tim can rejoin to complete the slide, then that will be fantastic. But as he said, we'll ensure that we circulate this afterwards. I think it's, from a sharing point of view, which I know that this forum was really keen to do, it's important that we share practices around the steps that we're taking to actually improve inclusion. So I think this will be a fantastic piece to get out there to see how others perhaps can support candidates, whether it's in the recruitment process, things like that as well. So I'll wrap up by sharing the date for the next D&I forum. So we were planning on doing it second last week of August, and we will look to send out a diary hold in probably about a month's time. So keep an eye out for that. Topic TBD, you all sort of know now a little bit more about what we're about and what we're looking to do. And so if there is an area that you think we should be discussing up next, we are very much open to input and to having speakers as well. Tim, thanks for joining us back again.
It's all right, sod's law.
Feel free to wrap up. Yeah, it's okay. These things happen. It's obviously had a long week on your end. It's hit Friday evening. But that's enough.
It's Friday. Yeah. And now it still knows it's Friday. So the second bit, I'll try and do this off. So I'll actually, while the slides aren't here, I'll actually just talk in different areas. So our mental health was in response to UK members coming to us. Here we go. So I'll go back to mental health at the end. So accessibility of information. This kind of speaks to Peter's point, and there's a nice little pointer from Barry there that hasn't been removed. But it's about actually how can we ensure that every touch point that our members, candidates, members, whoever else, if they have needs, that actually we are completely accessible. And actually, when we design this, we actually design, we've got a new website, we design it with all of this in mind. So actually, and Peter was talking about housing. So I worked in social housing for a while, and actually it's not a consideration. You don't actually think about how this can be adaptable. And the great thing about the internet and technology is it should be there by default. We shouldn't be not factoring this in. So this is a whole process that we're going to go through, actually review all of our work, and we've got our diversity inclusion strategy that's been developed, but there'll be different pillars that will hang off this, which will support our members. And I hope that what we want, and I'll say this at the end, is just feedback. We want people to actually talk to us. We can only design a service and an experience which is what you need if you engage with us and tell us what you need. And this visibility, you've touched on it just before I spoke about. We actually want to tell stories. The power of telling stories and creating visibility for the wide group of people that work in our communities, work in our firms. And actually, that's how we start changing mindsets, removing stigmas, by actually just them telling their stories, firms telling their stories about how they've supported people with disabilities, with neurodiversity into work. And then we can be leaders. We can actually be proud of it and actually go out and tell people what we're doing. And that's something that Barry and I are really keen on doing, which, I mean, it's great that there's so many people here that it'd be a resource bank, and we'd love to speak to you about how you can get involved in creating some thought leadership pieces, because my mantra, and I think people get sick of it, is that our members are our thought leaders. We're a conduit to actually show the built environment and the wider external environment just the power of what you do. And I think this for me is the key bit about visibility. That the rest will hang off it, but actually we need to start making it visible. So the last one, our mental health. We had some feedback last year. It's very tragic that a few of our members had taken their own lives due to depression. And I mean, depression and mental health and poor mental health is a crisis that has been exacerbated by COVID. And one thing that we discussed is that we're worried that there's a tidal wave that's going to happen when we come out of lockdown, different stages, different markets. And actually, how are we, which is a professional body which is made up of our members, actually supporting our people, our members? So we work with Lionheart, who are the charity for surveyors, to actually create this hub, it's basically a community on our Yammer platform, which provides support, resources, but also a safe space if people actually want to talk and share and actually connect with other people that may be facing similar issues themselves. So I invite you to, if you haven't already, at the bottom there, go and check it out and tell people about it. Actually talk to people in your networks. If your firms want to promote it internally, then please get in touch with myself or Barry.